Drop everything. My phone buzzed with a bank alert that shattered my world. The buzz echoed in my ears. My glass nearly slipped from my hand as the numbers glared back at me. $85,000. 12 years of scrimping and saving for my dream home vanished in one unauthorized transfer. The thief? My own parents, handing it all to my sister Victoria. I stormed into their dining room mid-celebration, the clink of champagne glasses filling the air, her smile glowing over a shiny new condo in Hudson Heights. How do you fight back when family betrays you like this? The laughter hit me like a wall as I stepped into my parents' Greenwich dining room. It was a perfect Sunday evening, too perfect, with the chandelier casting a scripted glow over the polished table. My mother, Margaret, hovered like a director, adjusting her fine china with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Something felt off, like a scene rehearsed without me. My father, Edward, anchored the head of the table, swirling his wine with forced joviality. Across from him, my sister Victoria sparkled in her silk dress, her posture screaming entitlement. I slipped into my seat, the bank alert from earlier still clawing at me. $85,000. My 12 years of scrimping vanished. The culprit? My parents' names on the withdrawal. I hadn't confronted them yet, but the betrayal simmered as I forced a nod at their small talk. Then the toast came. Edward stood, glass raised high. To family, he boomed, his eyes locking on Victoria with unmistakable pride. And to new beginnings. Margaret chimed in, her voice laced with performative warmth. To Victoria's stunning condo in Hudson Heights. She's earned her slice of the dream. Victoria rose gracefully, champagne in hand, her smile sharp as a blade. To fresh starts, she said, glancing my way with a flicker of triumph. And was that jealousy? Thanks to family who always steps up. The clinks echoed like judgments. I raised my glass on autopilot, my knuckles white. That condo wasn't her achievement, it was my stolen nest egg, funneled away without a word. My pulse thundered. Congratulations, I said, my tone even but edged. How'd you swing the down payment so fast? The room froze. Edward cleared his throat, his businessman facade cracking slightly. From the family account, naturally. It's an investment in the future, one that benefits everyone. You're stable, Charlotte? Victoria's just starting out. Margaret reached for my hand, her touch clammy with guilt. We didn't want to burden you, dear. You've given so much already, your career, your independence. This is about balance. Fairness for both daughters. Fairness? The word ignited me. Fairness was my double shifts in Boston, scraping by in a dingy apartment, funneling every spare dollar into that account they called ours. Fairness was trusting, it was for milestones like my dream home, not her luxury upgrade. Victoria's eyes met mine, her smirk fading into something raw, resentment, maybe, for my stability she'd never chased. Family first, right? Victoria added, her voice softer now, almost offensive. The laughter resumed, brittle and forced. I sat there, face composed, but inside, the fury boiled over. This wasn't dinner. It was an ambush, a declaration of war on my trust. And I was done playing the silent supporter. The room still hummed with laughter as I set my glass down, the stem cold and damp against my fingers. The applause had faded, but the weight of my father's words pressed harder with each second. I looked around the table, at their glowing faces, at the way Victoria soaked in the praise like sunlight, and I felt my chest tighten. The cracks beneath the celebration were starting to show, at least to me. I forced myself to breathe evenly, to keep my tone level. I just want to understand, I said, my eyes moving from Edward to Margaret. This account, the one you call the family savings, why wasn't I told the money was being used? Edward leaned back in his chair, his expression calm, almost rehearsed. Charlotte, you've been doing well for yourself. You own a business. You make more than enough to support yourself. Victoria needed this. It was time to help her take her first step into stability. Margaret reached across the table, her hand brushing mine with a softness that felt calculated. Honey, we always said this fund was for family milestones. Victoria's preparing for marriage. She needs a home. You've already proven yourself. You don't need this the way she does. The words tasted bitter. Proven myself? Did they forget the years I lived in a one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint in Brookline, eating microwave noodles while wiring money into that account? Did they forget the nights I worked until dawn just to keep up with clients? The years of saying no to vacations, no to luxuries, no to anything that might have made life easier? Victoria tilted her head, her expression the picture of innocence, though her tone carried a sharp edge. Charlotte, I'm not trying to take anything from you. I just want to move forward, and this was the only way. Don't you want me to be happy? It was the same trick she had used since we were children, twisting need into entitlement, turning guilt into currency. She looked at me with wide, glistening eyes, but I remembered too many times those eyes had narrowed in triumph when she got exactly what she wanted. I straightened my back, my voice still quiet but firm. This wasn't your money to use, Victoria. And it wasn't your decision, Mom and Dad. That account was supposed to be for all of us, not just for her. Edward's jaw tightened. You will watch your tone, young lady. We are your parents. We make decisions for the good of this family. Do not forget who supported you when you were starting out. I almost laughed at the irony. Support? I had worked 3 jobs in college while Victoria breezed through on allowances and summer trips. I had built every inch of my stability on my own sweat. If they had supported me, it was only in the ways that made for good stories at dinner parties, not in the nights when bills piled high and sleep was a luxury. Margaret's voice trembled, but not with weakness. It was her weapon, the one she had used to bend people for decades. Charlotte, don't make this ugly. We're a family. Families share. This is what love looks like. Love? The word struck me harder than the money ever could. Love wasn't draining someone's sacrifice in silence. Love wasn't handing everything to the child who always demanded more, while telling the one who worked hardest that she didn't need it. Love wasn't manipulation disguised as generosity. I met Victoria's eyes, her smirk flickering back into place, and I knew then that she was enjoying every second of my restraint. She wanted me to explode, to prove her right when she whispered to friends that I was bitter, jealous, selfish. But I would not give her that satisfaction. Instead, I placed my napkin neatly beside my plate, my movements slow and deliberate. If this is how you define family, then I think we need to reconsider what that word really means. But the silence that followed was louder than any argument. Margaret's face faltered. Edward's hand gripped his glass too tightly, and Victoria's smile froze. For the first time that evening, the cracks in their perfect celebration were visible to everyone at the table. I stared at my parents across the table, their words echoing in my head long after the glasses stopped clinking. They wanted me to believe that this was love, that this was family. But my memory had a sharper lens than their revisionist speeches, and it began to replay the reel of my life in vivid flashes. I was 22 again, fresh out of college, clutching my diploma in one hand and 3 job applications in the other. The rent for my Brookline apartment took half my paycheck. The rest went straight into the so-called family account, because my father had told me, one day, Charlotte, you'll thank us. One day this fund will secure your future. So I ate canned soup, skipped outings with friends, and wired every spare dollar into that account like it was a sacred trust. Meanwhile, Victoria was still in high school, posting selfies from Paris, flashing the new bracelet Dad had bought her in Rome. At the time, I laughed it off. She was the baby. I told myself she deserved a little spoiling. But the pattern never ended. Every milestone in my life was greeted with a lecture about responsibility, while hers was met with gifts. At 25, I pulled my first all-nighter at the design studio I had just started. My hands trembled as I laid out floor plans on a borrowed drafting table. I remember the thrill of signing my first client, the tears that came when I realized the fee would cover not just my bills, but another deposit into the family fund. That same month, Victoria failed out of her first semester at NYU. My parents flew her to Italy to clear her mind. They called it support. I called it indulgence. At 28, I turned down a vacation with colleagues to Greece because the cost felt extravagant. Instead, I spent the week painting the walls of my tiny apartment, reminding myself that sacrifice was noble, that one day it would pay off. That summer, Victoria drove up in a brand new Audi Q5, courtesy of Edward and Margaret. They smiled as if providing her with luxury was proof of their love, while my exhaustion was treated as proof of my strength. At 30, I signed the lease for my first real studio space in Boston. I celebrated with a modest dinner, candles stuck into takeout desserts. I still remember the pride that burned in my chest when I walked through that office door. But even then, the fund was never far from my mind. I wired in another deposit, a large one this time, nearly 10% of my annual earnings. I told myself, this is my house money. One day, this will be my key. That same year, Victoria announced her engagement to a man she had known for less than 6 months. The engagement party was a lavish affair in Manhattan, complete with champagne fountains and designer gowns. My parents covered the entire bill. When I asked how they managed such an expense, Edward shrugged and said, "It's family money. Don't worry, your turn will come." But my turn never did. My sacrifices became invisible, my milestones diminished to footnotes. Every time I asked about the account, the answer was the same: trust us. It's safe. And I did trust them, because they were my parents, and because I wanted so badly to believe that fairness would eventually prevail. Now, sitting at that table, listening to them toast Victoria's new condo, I realized the truth. The fund had never been about family. It had been about preserving the illusion that favoritism was generosity, that exploitation was love. I set my fork down, my appetite gone. The memories clung to me like smoke, the smell of past sacrifices lingering long after the fire had burned out. My sister laughed at something my mother whispered in her ear, her shoulders shaking with delight. I saw again the car keys being dropped into her palm, the boarding passes handed to her at the airport, the bills quietly erased in her name. I had been the steady pillar, the one who never asked for more, and in return they had built a palace of entitlement around her. And now, they expected me to sit quietly while they called theft a family milestone. The air in the dining room felt heavier with every passing minute. My parents' words echoed in my ears, each justification piling onto the weight already pressing down on my chest. Victoria basked in her victory, twirling the stem of her champagne glass between her fingers as if the crystal itself had been crafted in her honor. I reached for my water, my hands steady on the surface but trembling underneath. For 12 years, I had convinced myself that sacrifice was strength, that patience would eventually be rewarded. Tonight, I saw the truth clearly. Sacrifice had become the leash they wrapped around my neck, tugging whenever they pleased. The image of the bank alert burned in my mind. I remembered the vibration of my phone, the number flashing in bold digits. $85,000. Not a small miscalculation, not an accounting error, not a mistake that could be brushed aside. It was deliberate, signed, authorized. And the names on the authorization weren't mine. I couldn't stay seated any longer. My chair scraped against the hardwood as I pushed back, the sound startling enough to draw their eyes. Edward looked annoyed. Margaret looked wounded, and Victoria's smirk widened as though she had been waiting for this moment. "I need a moment," and I said, my voice low but firm. Without waiting for permission, I walked into the hallway, pulling my phone from my pocket. The screen glowed in the dim light, the bank app still open. The numbers hadn't changed. My balance was nearly empty, the history scrolling down with a series of deposits marked under my name and one withdrawal that erased everything. My reflection glared back at me from the black glass, pale and unblinking. I thought of every night in Brookline when I had eaten ramen because I had wired money into this account. I thought of the second-hand desk where I had drafted designs until dawn, telling myself it would all be worth it someday. And I thought of Victoria's laugh echoing in the dining room, the sound of someone enjoying the spoils of my silence. The floor beneath me seemed to tilt. My breath quickened. My fingers tightened around the phone. For a split second, I wanted to believe them, to convince myself that maybe they were right. Maybe this really was family love. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. Love doesn't empty your future without asking. Love doesn't rewrite the rules when it benefits someone else. I took another breath, slower this time, letting the fury sharpen into focus. My parents expected me to sit quietly, to swallow this betrayal as I had swallowed every smaller one before it. But I couldn't do it again. Not this time. I walked back into the dining room, my steps measured, my face calm. Margaret brightened as if she had won me back. Edward gave a small nod as if the matter were settled, and Victoria raised her glass again, daring me to stay silent. I set my phone on the table, the screen still lit with the bank statement. "Do you see this?" I asked, my voice steady, cutting through their chatter. Every dollar in this account came from me. 12 years of work, 12 years of deposits, all gone without a word. And you're celebrating like it was yours to give. Edward's jaw tightened. Margaret's eyes filled with practiced tears, and Victoria rolled her eyes as if I were being dramatic. But I didn't falter. For the first time in years, I wasn't begging for understanding. I was demanding it. "This isn't family support," I said, my tone rising. "This is theft dressed up as love." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It was thick, suffocating, a silence that cracked the illusion they had tried so hard to maintain. And in that silence, I felt something shift inside me. The leash they had held for so long had snapped. I didn't sleep that night. The bank alert replayed in my head like a siren I couldn't silence, each digit glowing against the darkness of my bedroom. $85,000. 12 years. My entire sense of security gone with one signature that wasn't mine. By morning, exhaustion had settled into my bones, but something else had taken root too, clarity. If my parents wanted to dress up theft as love, I needed to strip away every illusion. I needed proof. I drove straight to the branch of New England Trust Bank, where the account had been opened years earlier. The glass doors reflected my pale face as I pushed through, clutching the leather folder I had grabbed on my way out. A young teller greeted me with a practiced smile, but it faded when she pulled up the account on her screen. "Can I get full statements for the last 12 years? I asked, my voice firmer than I felt. She glanced at me, then at the screen, then excused herself to get the manager. Minutes later, I sat in a small office, the printer humming as page after page slid into the tray. When the manager handed me the stack, the weight of it pressed into my hands like a verdict. I flipped through the records. Line after line bore my name, my deposits, my sacrifices. Every paycheck, every bonus, every side project, there it was, in black and white. And then, near the bottom of the latest page, the line that stole my breath, one withdrawal, nearly the full balance, signed off by Edward Whitman. Authorized under parental co-signer rights. My parents hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. They had used the legal power I had trusted them with since I was a teenager. I slid the papers back into my folder, my hands trembling, but not with fear. This was my weapon now. At my studio later that day, I spread the statements across my desk, the numbers staring back at me with cold precision. My project manager, Maya Collins, stepped in carrying 2 cups of coffee. Her eyes widened when she saw the papers. "Charlotte, what is all this?" I told her everything, from the dinner ambush to the bank withdrawal. She listened quietly, then set the coffee down and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You can't fight them alone," she said. "They'll twist your words, play on your guilt. You need someone who speaks their language. A lawyer." And the thought made my stomach clench. Bringing in outsiders felt like crossing a line, like admitting the wound was deeper than family arguments. But then I looked at the numbers again, at the evidence of my labor stripped away without consent. If they had treated me like a stranger when they signed that withdrawal, then I had every right to treat them the same. That evening, I sat across from Daniel Harper in his Boston office. His shelves were lined with thick volumes of case law, his desk orderly, his gaze sharp behind his glasses. He listened without interrupting as I laid out the bank statements, the timeline, the betrayal. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "What you've described, Charlotte, is misappropriation of funds. It doesn't matter that it's your parents. Legally, this was your money. You've got 12 years of documentation showing sole deposits and 1 unauthorized withdrawal. That's a strong case." The word case made my throat tighten. I had never imagined dragging my own parents into legal proceedings. But the memory of their toasts, of Victoria's triumphant smile, hardened me. "What can I do?" I asked. Daniel tapped the stack of papers. "First, we file an official demand letter. That gives them a chance to return the money before this escalates. Second, we notify the bank to freeze further activity on the account. If they try to touch anything else, it will be flagged immediately. Third, you decide how far you're willing to take this. Civil suit. Restitution. Even damages." The words felt heavy, almost surreal. Yet beneath the weight was something I hadn't felt in days: power. Daniel slid a form across the desk, pointing to a line at the bottom. "You need to understand, Charlotte. Families often hide behind guilt. But in the eyes of the law, theft is theft. Blood doesn't change that." I picked up the pen, my hand steady this time. As the ink flowed onto the page, I felt the leash around my neck loosen another inch. The demand letter had barely been delivered before the calls began. My phone lit up in the middle of a client meeting, Edward's name flashing across the screen. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside to answer. His voice came through sharp, like a blade pressed against glass. "How dare you drag a lawyer into this? Do you have any idea what you've done to this family's reputation? You've humiliated us, Charlotte. Over money. Over money?" The phrase rang hollow, absurd. It wasn't just money. It was my future, my sacrifices, my belief in their promises. "I'm not the one who emptied the account," I said, my voice calm, though my pulse raced. "You did that. I'm simply asking for what belongs to me." Edward's reply was a low growl. "We are your parents. We decide what's best. Don't forget who put food on your table when you were a child." The line went dead before I could respond. Minutes later, Margaret called. Her voice was softer, dripping with practiced sorrow. "Charlotte, please. We don't need lawyers. We need love. Families share. Families forgive. I carried you for 9 months, and now you want to punish me in front of strangers? What happened to compassion?" And for a moment, guilt threatened to rise, but I forced it back down. Compassion had no place in theft disguised as love. That evening, the counterattack took a new form. Victoria posted a photo on Instagram, her hand holding a champagne glass in front of the Hudson Heights condo. The caption read, So grateful for my amazing parents who believed in me and made my dream possible. Family first, always. Out within an hour, the post had hundreds of likes, comments pouring in from friends and relatives. So proud of you. Victoria, your parents are incredible. Family is everything. Each word twisted the knife deeper. The narrative was shifting, painting me as selfish, cold, unwilling to share. The next morning, an email landed in my inbox from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. I can't believe you're suing your own parents. Everyone's talking about it. Don't air family business like this. It makes you look bitter. By noon, 3 more messages arrived from distant relatives, each one echoing the same theme: shame, guilt, betrayal, but aimed at me, not at the ones who had stolen from me. At the studio, Maya caught me staring at my phone, the screen glowing with criticism. Don't read those, she said firmly, pulling the device from my hands. They're trying to drown you in guilt because it's the only weapon they have left. I rubbed my temples, the pressure building behind my eyes. But they're turning everyone against me. It's working. People actually think I'm the villain here. Maya leaned closer, her voice steady. Charlotte, listen to me. This isn't about public opinion. It's about truth. You have the receipts. You have the law on your side. They're making noise because they're scared. Noise doesn't erase facts. Her words anchored me, but the sting of betrayal lingered. My parents had raised me to believe family was everything, and now they were weaponizing that belief against me. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I opened the folder of bank statements again. The numbers didn't lie. For 12 years, I had carried this family's so-called legacy. And now, when I demanded accountability, they painted me as selfish. I closed the folder and whispered into the quiet, I won't let them rewrite this story. Good day. For days, I let their voices echo unchecked. My father's accusations, my mother's pleas, Victoria's smiling captions. They painted themselves as the victims of my selfishness, and the chorus of relatives joined in, all too eager to believe the story that made them comfortable. But every time I opened my folder, every time I ran my fingers across the ink of those bank statements, I remembered the truth. And I knew silence was no longer protection. Silence was complicity. On a Friday morning, I walked into my studio with a decision burning inside me. Maya looked up from her desk, reading the resolve on my face before I said a word. You're going public, she said. I nodded. If they want to play this out in the open, then that's exactly where I'll fight. That afternoon, I drafted a statement. No anger, no theatrics, just clarity. I wrote that Whitman Interiors was privately owned, that no family members had ever contributed financially, and that recent claims to the contrary were false. I attached 3 key receipts, a 10-year deposit record under my name, a notarized payroll history, and the withdrawal signed solely by Edward Whitman. When I hit send, the statement went to my partners, my clients, and a handful of trusted colleagues who had asked questions. It wasn't about winning likes or sympathy. It was about anchoring the narrative in truth before their lies spread further. The response was immediate. My phone buzzed with messages from clients, many expressing support. We stand with you, Charlotte. Receipts don't lie. Proud to keep working with Whitman Interiors. The relief was sharp, almost dizzying. For the first time, I felt the current begin to shift. But the Whitmans weren't finished. That evening, Victoria posted a long video on Instagram. She sat in her Hudson Heights condo, staged with flowers and soft lighting, her voice trembling as she told her followers she was being attacked by her own sister, who couldn't stand to see her succeed. The comments poured in, some sympathetic, some cruel toward me. She was playing the role perfectly, the golden child under siege. The next day, I received an email that made my jaw tighten. It was from the church my parents still attended in Greenwich. The pastor wrote that he had heard disturbing reports and hoped we could resolve things quietly for the sake of family harmony. And it was clear my parents had carried their narrative into every corner of their social world. I wanted to crumble under the weight of it, but then something unexpected happened. My Uncle Robert called. His voice was rough, almost hesitant, as if he had debated dialing for hours. "Charlotte," he said, "I know what you're going through. Years ago, I gave your father $10,000. He told me it was for the family fund, something we'd all share someday. I never saw a cent of it again. When I asked, he brushed me off, said it was handled. I let it go. But seeing what they've done to you, I can't stay silent." His words hit me like fresh oxygen. Another receipt. Another truth long buried under guilt and silence. "Uncle Robert," I said, my voice breaking for the first time in weeks, "would you be willing to put that in writing?" There was a pause, then a firm reply. "Yes. They've taken enough from all of us." That evening, I scanned his signed statement and added it to my growing folder. Now it wasn't just my word against theirs. It was a pattern. A legacy of taking, cloaked in the language of family. When I looked at the stack of documents, bank statements, payroll records, Robert's testimony, I no longer felt like the cornered daughter. I felt like the woman who finally had the power to rewrite the narrative. I whispered into the quiet of my studio, the city lights flickering outside. If they wanted this fight in public, then public is where they'll lose. The air inside Harper and Associates was crisp with the scent of polished wood and leather, a world away from the chaos of family dinners and social media battles. I sat at the long oak conference table, my folder of documents neatly stacked in front of me. Daniel Harper adjusted his glasses, his calm presence grounding me as the door opened. Edward strode in first, his shoulders squared, his expression carved from stone. Margaret followed, her eyes already damp, clutching a handkerchief as if rehearsed. Victoria trailed behind them, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood, her smirk intact. They settled across from me, the three of them forming a wall of defiance. Daniel began without pleasantries. "Thank you all for coming. Today we're here to review evidence and discuss restitution. I'll be direct, this is not a family disagreement. This is a financial matter with legal consequences." Edward scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "This is absurd. Dragging your parents to a law office over money? Charlotte should be ashamed." Daniel slid a packet across the table, his tone even. "Please review. These are 12 years of deposit records into the Whitman family savings account. Every deposit is under Charlotte's name. Not a single contribution from anyone else." Margaret dabbed her eyes, refusing to look at the pages. Edward's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Victoria leaned forward, flipping through the papers with exaggerated boredom. "And here," Daniel continued, sliding another page, "is the withdrawal authorization. Nearly the full balance, signed by Edward Whitman. Legal? Yes. Under outdated cosigner rights. Ethical? Absolutely not." I kept my eyes on them, steady, silent. "Let the receipts speak." Edward finally spoke, his voice low and angry. "I did what needed to be done for this family. Charlotte doesn't need that money. She has her business. Victoria needed it more." Need," Daniel said firmly, "does not justify misappropriation. This isn't about family hierarchy. It's about theft of designated funds. And there's more." He opened a separate folder and placed a notarized statement on the table. "Robert Whitman has testified that he contributed $10,000 to the same account years ago, under the impression it was for shared family use. He never saw it again. This shows a pattern of misuse." Margaret gasped, her hand trembling as she reached for the paper. Edward's face flushed crimson. Victoria slammed the packet shut. This is ridiculous. You're making it sound like a crime. Daniel's voice didn't waver. It is. Civil misappropriation carries penalties. Restitution is mandatory. If this proceeds to court, damages and interest will be pursued. My client has every right to sue. Margaret's tears flowed freely now, but they no longer softened me. I remembered too many nights of her tears used as shields, too many arguments where guilt replaced reason. Victoria turned to me, her eyes narrowing. You always wanted to tear me down, Charlotte. Admit it. This isn't about money. It's about jealousy. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm but sharp. Jealousy doesn't create 12 years of deposits. Jealousy doesn't pay bills, skip vacations, or wire money into an account month after month. This isn't envy, Victoria. This is theft. And I will not be silent anymore. The room stilled, the words hanging heavy. Daniel leaned forward. Here are the terms. Full repayment of $85,000 plus 6% annual interest, to be made in structured payments over the next 3 years. If you refuse, we proceed to court, where this record and testimony will be made public. Silence. Edward's fists clenched. Margaret sobbed into her handkerchief. Victoria stared at me with hatred that could have burned through steel. At last, Edward's voice broke the silence. Fine. We'll sign. Daniel slid the agreement across the table. The sound of the pen scratching against paper was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. One by one, they signed, their defiance shrinking with every stroke of ink. When it was my turn, I added my signature with a steady hand. The deal was sealed, not just on paper, but in my heart. For the first time, I wasn't the daughter carrying their burdens. I was the woman drawing the line. As we stood to leave, Daniel's words echoed in my ears. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are clarity, and in that clarity, I finally felt free. When the conference room door closed behind me, the weight I had carried for 12 years seemed to slip from my shoulders. The signatures were ink on paper, but to me, they were more than that. They were proof that I had finally broken free from a lifetime of silence. I walked through the streets of Boston that evening with my head higher than I could remember. The air was brisk, the kind that nipped at your skin and forced you to breathe deeper. For once, each breath didn't feel heavy. It felt cleansing. Back at Whitman Interiors, my staff was waiting. Maya had told them what happened, and as I stepped into the studio, they rose from their desks, clapping softly at first, then louder. Their support warmed me more than any parental praise ever had. These people had seen me push through deadlines, lead with integrity, and build something out of nothing. Their applause wasn't obligation. It was respect. Congratulations, Charlotte, Maya said, pressing a coffee into my hand. You didn't just win. You stood your ground. That's something none of them can take from you. I smiled. A genuine one this time, not the hollow curve I had worn at family dinners. It's the first time I feel like I'm not living for their approval, I admitted. The following weeks moved quickly. The repayment plan was filed with the court, monitored closely by Daniel's office. Each notification of a transfer felt like another brick being returned to the foundation I had built. Piece by piece, I was reclaiming what had been stolen. But beyond the money, something deeper shifted. I no longer flinched when my phone buzzed with their names. Calls went unanswered, messages unopened. Not out of anger, but out of choice. I realized I didn't need to keep explaining myself. Boundaries didn't require justification. They required commitment. One evening, as I worked late at the studio, I caught my reflection in the window. For years, I had seen a woman bent under the weight of duty, her shoulders hunched, her eyes tired. Now I saw someone else, a woman standing tall, eyes steady, carrying only what she chose to carry. I thought about the little girl I once was, sitting in her room waiting for her parents to notice the drawings she had taped to the wall. That girl had believed love meant proving herself worthy again and again. Tonight, I wished I could whisper to her, "You were always enough. You didn't have to buy their approval with sacrifice." Word of the settlement spread quietly through the family. The cousins who had once sent scolding emails now grew silent. A few even reached out, cautiously supportive, once the receipts became undeniable. The shift was subtle but real. Lies may travel fast, but truth has a way of planting roots. At Sunday dinner time, when I used to sit in Lake Oswego enduring the rituals of manipulation, I now found myself at my own table in Boston, candles flickering, a simple meal laid out. No champagne toasts, no staged smiles. Just peace. I raised a glass of water to myself and whispered, "This is what standing firm feels like." The silence in the room was no longer suffocating. It was mine, and for the first time, it was enough. A year later, when I looked back on everything that had happened, the money was no longer the centerpiece. Yes, I had recovered the savings that were stolen. And yes, I had built a scholarship fund that carried my name. But the real treasure I had gained was something money could never buy: the courage to draw the line, the wisdom to protect my peace, and the clarity to understand that love without respect is just control dressed in softer words. I had spent so many years believing silence was strength, that enduring unfairness somehow proved my loyalty. But silence had never protected me. It had only made me invisible. It took losing everything to realize the most dangerous betrayal is not when others cross your boundaries. It is when you erase them yourself in the name of keeping the peace. The lesson was simple, but it cut deep. Family is not a license to exploit. Blood may connect us, but it does not excuse cruelty. Respect, fairness, and accountability, those are what make family real. And when those are missing, you are allowed to walk away. Every Friday, when I sat at the table in my studio with my team, I saw what family could truly mean. We shared laughter without jealousy, victories without manipulation, and burdens without conditions. That was when I finally understood you can choose your family. And sometimes, choosing means building it from scratch, with people who see you, value you, and never demand your silence. If there is one thing I want you to carry from my story, it is this: protecting yourself is not selfish. Drawing boundaries is not cruelty. Standing firm is not betrayal. It is survival. It is strength. It is the only way to live without abandoning yourself. So, if you have ever felt the sting of betrayal, if you have ever been told that your sacrifices were expected and your voice didn't matter, let this be your reminder: you are not wrong to fight back. You are not cruel for demanding fairness. You are worthy of respect, no matter who tries to convince you otherwise. And if this story spoke to something in your own heart, stay with me. Join this community where pain turns into power, where betrayal is met with justice, and where silence is broken into a voice that cannot be ignored. This is Heartless Revenge. Subscribe now, because every story matters, including yours. Your pain, your power, your story.